Champ Week is here on Fielding the 68, our bracketology show, and we have got you all set for everything you need to know as we count down to Selection Sunday. I am Kevin Sweeney, joined today by Rocco Miller and Andy Bottoms. We are brought to you by Rhythm, and we have a wall-to-wall week ahead of us with games pretty much all hours of the day. We will be updating our bracket daily. We will not have the show daily. We will have a show today, Wednesday, Friday, and then a Selection Sunday special. So we're adding that Wednesday show for you guys, midweek check-in on things as the bubble shapes up. But we will have you covered. So check out the Field of 68 social channels to find the bracket every day. We will have a new projected update. Everything that changes, we will be right there with it. Should be a fun week. It's always a fun week. I guess, Andy, I'll start with you. Do you enjoy this week, or do you feel burdened by the stress of getting to the finish line here? What's the vibes?
It's a healthy mix of both, I guess I would say. I feel behind already at the beginning of the week, which is not really a good sign, I wouldn't say, but plenty of time to catch up, and then lots to look at it. It's one of those where you get into all these conversations about how much the conference tournaments really matter. I know there's differing opinions on that, and probably something I try to remind myself that it's one game out of 30 plus for each team, and try not to get too caught up in the hoopla of some of the games and overreact to things. But that's easier said than done sometimes for a bracketology perspective, as well as just from a fan's perspective.
Certainly. Rocco, what about you? What's the energy levels look like? Are we already short on sleep? How do things look here as we crawl towards Selection Sunday?
Definitely short on sleep already. It's going to get worse as the week goes on, no doubt. And similar to Andy, I mean, it's a nice, healthy balance. I don't know if it's healthy. It's probably unhealthy, but it feels balanced. I actually feel less stressed this year for some reason than any year, but that could change any minute. So who knows? But I think in general, like, this feels a lot different than maybe the last year or two, just from the standpoint of I feel like way more bid steals are possible in play, and there also could be really none from what we expect, which could expand the pool that we've been forecasting by 2 spots. And then there's also just the sheer amount of bubble expansion. We'll talk about the teams in a minute, but just like a couple teams really surprised me this morning that they are that close to falling out of the field when they've seemingly been safe. And that's kind of increased the, oh shoot, I better look at this 2 more times or 3 more times and make sure I got it right. And that's where I agree with Andy. I kind of ran out of time today because I don't even feel that great about what I put down, because I think it's going to be a constant reevaluation throughout the week.
We always start the show with who's helped and who hurt themselves in the last, especially over the weekend. So Rocco, I think that, what you just brought up is pretty interesting. Teams that all of a sudden you look up and they're a lot closer to the cut line than you realize. Who are those teams, and how much did this weekend's results play into that?
Yeah, I think the first one I have to throw out there is Mississippi State. They finished 0-2 to end the year. They find themselves today at just the top 2 quadrants, 6-11. And then you have the loss to Southern on top of that. You compare them to like an Indiana State, a team of the night last night. There's a lot of reasons to take Indiana State above a Mississippi State now. I get it that Mississippi State played a power conference schedule, of course, beat Tennessee and Auburn on their home court, had a great neutral court tournament where they beat the Cougars of Wazoo and your Northwestern State Wildcats. But if you look at their top 2 quadrant road games, they're just 1-8. And their only win was at LSU, a non-tournament team. And their strength of record, which is kind of one of the few things you can really try to use to compare an Indiana State comparison, just as a quick example, is 52nd, and Indiana State's at 38, a much safer place. So that is one that really just caught my eye to begin with. Another one, you look at like a TCU who's just 7-11 now. They take a home loss to UCF. The thing I like a little bit more about TCU is they have just 2 losses outside of the field. So a little less risque. The thing about Mississippi State that makes them very risque is that Southern loss on top of everything else. And then I also think Oklahoma, you look at Oklahoma's against the field, it is really hard to stomach. They're 2-10 and 12 opportunities against the field. And they're both home wins, very nice home wins. Iowa State and BYU, good teams. They also start to have, I hate to compare anything to like last year's Providence, but with all these Porter Moser rumors, they have kind of that Ed Cooley feel. The resume is falling apart. They open I believe they opened the Big 12 tournament against TCU themselves. And it's just, I think they're going to probably just have enough rope to hang on and get in. But it really just feels a little yucky to put a team in like this that's leaking oil down the stretch when all these other teams are starting to play their best basketball, whether it be, a Texas A&M or otherwise. So those were the teams I really noticed that surprised me.
So just quickly following up on that, Rocco, is that a situation where these teams just kind of need to win one game in the conference tournament and all of a sudden they're safe again? Is this a legitimately dangerous thing moving forward for those teams?
Yeah, I think the Big 12 ones is probably a win and they'll be okay. But the TCU Oklahoma example, they play each other. So, we'll see. I think TCU, just because they won at Baylor, even though their records aren't as good as Oklahoma's, gives them a little more strength at the top. They also have a better road neutral record. So those two teams, I think, will make it regardless. But Mississippi State's the one where they open up with LSU. They lose that. Then you're talking about a team when you remove quad 4 is just 13-12, but they do have a quad 4 loss. Plus their strength of schedule out of conference was 229. And everything starts to fall out of whack. They'd be below 500 road neutral. So I think the Bulldogs are the ones really to watch out of that group.
Andy, on the other side, certainly some teams that move the needle in a positive direction this weekend. You could highlight someone like Drake that obviously won their auto bid. They were on the fringes of the bubble conversation. But maybe some other teams that you thought had strong weekends and maybe benefited themselves from a selection standpoint.
Yeah, it's interesting. I listed a lot more losers than I did winners as I was getting ready for the show. And I think that was just because you had a lot of teams on or around the bubble who lost. So you had the two that Rocco mentioned, Michigan State, I'd kind of throw in a similar category. And then you look at the true teams that were in our last 4 in on Friday, Villanova, New Mexico, Providence was around there, Utah was around there. And then Indiana State, which we already touched on, Iowa was in that mix. So to me, a lot more losers. The winners, I would say, were a little bit more at the top of the bracket. As you look at Carolina winning at Duke, I think that whether that puts them at the 1 line or not, I think they remain in that conversation versus losing that game, even with Tennessee's loss, may have really hurt them from that perspective. Kentucky winning at Tennessee maybe helps them push more toward the 3 line. And then Houston blowing out Kansas, their metrics were already really strong. Does that jump them past UConn for people who didn't have them past them already as the 2nd overall seed? Does that put them in a conversation with Purdue for the top overall seed? So I think you actually oddly saw more winners there. The only couple I would throw out that are maybe off that, Boise winning at San Diego State in a wild game on Friday night really solidified their case, not that they were really on the bubble. And then Wake beating Clemson, arguably one of the only bubble teams who actually won a game over the weekend. And so that one helps them at least stay in the conversation heading into the ACC tournament.
Yeah, and Wake had, I don't know if fallen completely off after that Georgia Tech loss, but had put themselves in dire straits. And so bouncing back and getting that win, at least I think, restarts the conversation with them and see what they can accomplish in the ACC conference tournament coming up here this week. Let's get into the 1 seed. As Andy mentioned, some interesting movement there, especially with the North Carolina win at Duke. And we'll see if that was enough to swing the consensus. It did not, however. Purdue, UConn, Houston, and Tennessee, our order remains, same as on Friday. The Vols did lose at home, although against a good team, Kentucky and North Carolina, who the committee liked. I mean, remember, we did this last 3 weeks ago, right, when they did the top 16 reveal. North Carolina a little bit higher than people expected. So since then, they've been pretty darn good, including that road win at Duke, the best win you can get in the ACC. I'll start with you, Rocco. How close was it for North Carolina, or did you have North Carolina over Tennessee for that 4th number 1?
I do have North Carolina as the 4th number 1. It was not easy. I could probably be convinced to switch if somebody wanted to work hard on me. But it came back to me, that exact point you just mentioned. Maybe didn't mean to mention it in this way, but I think one of the surprises of the bracket preview was that North Carolina was 5th overall, Tennessee was 6th. I think a lot of us, maybe all of us, had Tennessee higher. And I think based on the mix of results we've seen since, Tennessee, of course, going 3-1 in that gauntlet, but the one loss was a home loss. So you never want to lose at home, even though Kentucky is a very strong opponent. And Carolina getting, like you said, the best road win you can get in that league, a top 12 road win, if you will. I think that's enough to basically put them back to almost where they were that day. And we already know for a fact that the committee had Carolina higher. So I think that was my almost tiebreaker. The things I like more about Tennessee are just the fact that they've won 9 games against the field to Carolina's 6. They have 6 high quad 1 wins to Carolina's 4, but of course get more opportunities. So Carolina's records in each of the columns is better than Tennessee's, just because Tennessee's taken on a couple more losses. And with everything else being equal, the only other thing that you look at is road neutral records, where Carolina gets the edge there too. I would guess the committee would be very close, but I would just give the nudge to UNC because of what we learned 3 weeks ago.
Andy, the head-to-head result with Carolina and Tennessee, how big of a factor do you think that is? Because I think, at least with the top end wins, Tennessee probably wins out there. But that win does seem to hold some weight in a lot of people's eyes, especially given how close these might be. I will say this though, right? I mean, it's a home game for North Carolina. We've seen how strong home court is. Just curious on from your perspective, how much you're weighing that head-to-head result when you're deciding on Tennessee versus Carolina.
Yeah, I think the fact that it was at North Carolina certainly doesn't negate it. It still counts as a really quality win for North Carolina. But I do think if it was a neutral court win, maybe that looks a little bit different. I think it was even last week, Marquette and Kansas are next to each other on a neutral, and they played on a neutral court. Like, it can be more of a tiebreaker to me in those scenarios. And I actually had Tennessee still as the 4th 1 seed. So I guess to me, it didn't mean as much in general. I think Rocco makes good points about that. You look at since the reveal, Carolina's 6-0, Tennessee 6-1. But, really winning at Duke, obviously a huge accomplishment. Otherwise, Carolina's best win is winning at Virginia in that stretch. And you look at what Tennessee did. They won at Alabama, at South Carolina, beat Texas A&M and Auburn at home, did lose to Kentucky. So is that enough to leapfrog them 1 spot since then? I think there's an argument to be made that it is. Quality metrics, their average is better. Resume metrics, their average is slightly better. So I was more apt to keep Tennessee there. I think the argument of where the committee had them heading into that is probably the best one for North Carolina, quite honestly. And that head-to-head win certainly doesn't hurt, but it's not the end-all be-all for me in that scenario.
So big picture on the one line, Rocco, before we head to break. I think we've been confident on the show that Purdue, UConn, and Houston are all number 1 seed locks. And since they all want different paths, there's not a ton of competition there. Now, obviously, the ranking of them could vary. We'll see how it shakes out, but it shouldn't have too substantial an impact on the overall how the bracket looks. Are we down to 2 teams for that last number 1 spot, or is Arizona still in the conversation?
I believe so, yeah. And the committee did have Arizona as a 1 seed on the previews. You don't want to dismiss the Wildcats. But, of course, they took a loss at home to Wazoo, and then, of course, a 15-point convincing loss at USC on Saturday evening. So I think that's enough to convince me, at least, that they'll be in that cushy number 6 spot, which I say cushy because they're still going to be in the West. They'll still go to Salt Lake City, and they'll still have the path to Los Angeles, which would be their preferred path. Even if they're a 1 seed, they're just going to have to play a little bit tougher competition when they get there. And, they're so head and shoulders above, I think, the next best resume for 7th overall. I don't know exactly what Arizona has to play for. I wish it was like the old days. In the old days, if Carolina and Tennessee had lost their first game this week and Arizona went and won the Pac-12 tournament, that'd probably be enough to get them back up to number 1. But what we've learned in the last few years is we can't put a lot of faith in that. That's in some of these cases, especially 2022 bracket. The Saturday results for sure were not factored in. So it's a grain of salt situation. But Arizona for themselves, the way they lost to USC, of course, they want to come out here to Vegas and play a little bit better.
All right, that's the look at the ones. Again, Purdue, UConn, Houston, and Tennessee on that top line. When we come back, we're going to sort through the SEC, a couple of interesting Big 12 squads, and even the Mountain West as things push towards a 5 or even 6 bid Mountain West. We'll see you then. Fielding 68.
The best month of the year is here, which is why you need to know that we are now partnered with BetMGM. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 throughout the conference and NCAA tournament. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use the bonus code FIELD150, and you'll get $150 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not that bet hits. Here's how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD150. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game, and you get $150 in free bets regardless of the outcome. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD150 when you sign up. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the conference tournaments and for the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boosts, and what I love the most, a nice little parlay boost, as well as a ridiculous array of prop bets for anything that you could possibly imagine betting on in March and in early April. BetMGM is the king of the prop bet. So go download the BetMGM app, use Field150 as the code, and sign up today. And while I've got you here, a quick request. The best way to support the Field of 68 content that you get here for absolutely free is to engage with it. Rate and review the podcast. Like and share YouTube videos. Tell your friends about us. It all helps in a world where the algorithm is king. And now, back to our show.
Fielding 68 brought to you by Rhythm, getting us started this week with wall-to-wall coverage we will have over the next 7 days leading into Selection Sunday. As we mentioned off the top, we will have a show Wednesday night, a show Friday night. We will also have a show on Selection Sunday previewing the selection show, plus plenty to get to with live or daily updates of the bracket. So check out the Field of 68 on Twitter, Instagram, wherever you find us to find that daily bracket update. Our guys are working very hard behind the scenes to make it happen. So check out what the latest is every single day. Starting now, we're going to go through some just overall sorting questions. A lot of teams around the same place on the seed list, conference to conference. So starting with the SEC, where Auburn, Alabama, and Kentucky, you see all of them 3s and 4s a lot of times. Auburn, kind of an interesting resume with the lack of quad one, top tier wins, but elite metrics. I'll start with you, Rocco, down south. How do you navigate this group of teams? Kentucky, obviously, I think probably the leg up at this point because of the win at Tennessee, but all three have some compelling things for and against them, right?
Totally. Yeah, and I think Kentucky is up there with the 3 seeds today. They haven't got the abundance of tournament wins like a Kansas, but what they have done is packed 4 mean punches on the road at Tennessee, at Auburn, at Florida, at Mississippi State, 4 of the best road wins you can get in that league. The only team to win at Auburn, in fact. So although their records are 500-ish still, they're 6-5 quad one, 8-7 in the top 2 quads. That is a ton of weight to bring to the table. And you can start to overlook some of their blemishes, like a home loss to UNC Wilmington, for example. And, of course, the Wildcats playing their best ball at the right time and a neutral court win against North Carolina that still matters. For Auburn and Alabama, they are getting, for me, scrunched down towards the bottom of the 4 line, teetering on a 5. I did have Auburn as a 5 last Friday. They squeezed back in with the 4s today due to some help. But I think the problem there is, you can look at quad 1 alone and it'll give you all of your answers to that. Auburn just 1-7, Alabama just 3-9. And both of them, for the most part, beyond that, have handled almost all their other business. So they're not falling and taking the bad losses. Neither one of them have a bad loss. In fact, they usually demolish anybody that's not a top-tier team or a quad 1 game. Alabama has a little bit of an edge with the road win at Mississippi State. Auburn doesn't have a road win as good as that. However, Auburn has better records and 3 less losses across the board in the quadrant system, and a better road record. So and better performance numbers as well. So I do have Auburn just slightly above Alabama, but they're both squeezing into the 4 seed line as far as I have them.
If you're wondering, if you're sitting at home and you're like, how does Auburn sit at number 4 on KenPom today? They don't have all these great wins. Like, who have they beaten, right? Everyone's asking that question. Well, the answer is that 24 games they've played, or that they've won, 24 wins, all by double figures. That'll juice up those performance metrics quite a bit. In the Big 12, Kansas, Baylor, and Iowa State also in that protected seed group, probably a little bit higher on the curve than that Auburn, Alabama, Kentucky triumvirate, Andy, but all interesting teams with interesting cases. Kansas getting destroyed by Houston over the weekend can't help, but the top of that resume is still probably a little stronger than what Baylor and Iowa State have to offer. How do you sort through those three?
Yeah, I think the extra factor, just to stick with Kansas for a second, is the injuries, right? How do you assess them? What's McCullough's status, Hunter Dickinson, all of those things. So that's ambiguous at best to try to figure out how you really assess them, especially given their lack of depth and some of that. But you can't ignore the fact that at full strength, they've beaten Houston, UConn, Tennessee, Baylor, Kentucky. And so that really keeps them in the conversation. I think if you want to look for other things to push them down the list, they're just 3-7 in true road games. They do have the quad 3 loss, but 5 high quad 1 wins is still pretty impressive if you believe them to be at full strength heading into things. And at some point, the losses just pile up and matter. But they've still got enough, on the top end of the resume to really not fall too far. And then you really look at the other two, Baylor and Iowa State, who, for me at least, were right next to each other on the seed list. I think a lot of other people would be in the same boat for the last two or the first 3 seed, depending upon how you look at them. And you look at Baylor 9-8. They've got 4 high quad 1 wins. They've done some work in the non-conference, beating Auburn and Florida. A lot of their best wins have come at home outside of those non-conference wins. A lot of their best league wins have come at home. And then you got Iowa State, often discussed in terms of the non-conference strength of schedule, which feels like a potential thing that's going to penalize them. But they are 8-6 in quad 1, so one less win, but better winning percentage when you compare them to Baylor. Also have 4 quad 1A wins. They're 4-3 in quad 1A versus 4-7 for Baylor. But they've got 9 of their wins in quad 4. Road wins a little bit better than what you've seen from Baylor. They won at Texas, won at TCU, and then they knocked off Houston, BYU, and Kansas at home. Just haven't really, if you're looking down there for a strong non-conference win for them, it's tough to find. And so it's the question of, the big questions for the committee with this group are, one, how do they handle the non-conference strength of schedule that Iowa State has? How much does that matter? How much do they get penalized, even though they've got the best quality metrics of the group? The resume metrics for all 3 of them are, you average them out, they're all basically the same. And the second question is how they deal with the injuries to Kansas as you look at it that way. So you kind of hedge your bets a little bit, at least for us at this point, and may not push them down quite to the 4 line, but they're definitely getting close if they're not there already.
Yeah, I guess, Andy, the question I'd have with Kansas, like, how much do the aesthetics matter, right? Obviously, getting blown out by Houston is not a new thing. Lots of teams have done it. They're really good. But I think it's safe to say that Kansas has not really looked the part of an elite team over the last several weeks, and may look even worse at the Big 12 tournament if the likes of Hunter Dickinson and Kevin McCullough are held out. Obviously, both have looming injury concerns. Do you think the committee will punish them because they just don't feel like they're playing great basketball at the moment?
I think that's fair. That kind of comes into the eye test component of things and how much you really believe that that's used. I think it's fair to look at them in that regard. The challenge is you just haven't had a lot of chances to see them at full strength recently. And that has coincided pretty well with when they haven't looked good. So if you don't believe that those guys are going to be able to play or play at full strength in the tournament, which is a little bit subjective, and they certainly will ask the teams for injury updates, and the teams will be as vague as they can be with the committee, I'm sure, as anyone would be in that scenario. You got to try to figure out how to parse that out and say, hey, is it really believable that this is the team who picked up those 5 really, really good wins? And I don't know that you're going to see a ton from them in the Big 12 tournament to really let you know that, unless they come out and beat Baylor, because beating either Cincinnati or West Virginia in their first game isn't going to move the needle one way or the other. Probably isn't going to prove anything from a health perspective. Now, if you go out and beat Baylor, maybe you make a more compelling argument that, yeah, we are that team. And the other part of that is Iowa State and Baylor could very well face off in the semis. We'll argue how much that will matter to the committee, but as a tiebreaker and teams that are really close together that wouldn't have a lot of bracketing implications, you could certainly see that game mattering quite a bit.
Should be fun to watch in Kansas City. Let's head to the Mountain West. Vegas will be the heart of college basketball this week. 5 conference tournaments, maybe 6. I have to keep track. Lots of teams in town. 5, yes. Thank you, Rocco. Always on it. I believe in the Sin City as we speak. So Rocco will have us covered. I will be out in Vegas as well. If you see me, say what's up. On the Mountain West front, interesting kind of developments here, especially with some of the recent success for Nevada and Boise. Rocco, I mean, road win at Viejas, certainly a potent one for Boise. How far can they rise? How much does San Diego State fall because of a result like that? You know, it just feels like a lot of these teams, you see them just kind of tossed in between the 6 and the 8 line. Curious how you break it down with those 4. Right.
Absolutely, yeah. And I am here in Vegas. It's beautiful. You're going to love it. Can't wait to see you when you get here, Kevin. But I think, you know, every time something like this happens, and regardless, if you're going through the bracketology exercise, you have to do a reevaluation from scratch. No premonitions needed. In fact, it's better if you don't have any. And when I went through the process this morning, took all day. It was exhausting. Still working on it, actually. Nevada, to me, is the strongest for seeding, mainly because they've now matched San Diego State's 6 wins against the field, but they have 3 tournament-level road wins, true road wins, with the 3 mountain schools at Utah State, at Colorado State, and at Boise State. And then they splash in that TCU double-digit win that they had at the Diamond Head. Everything about Nevada is beautiful from a quad standpoint as well. You got a 7-5 quad record, 9-5 through top 2, 15-6 through top 3, 11-4 away neutral. I mean, everything about Nevada right now looks great. No reason for them not to be a 6 seed. San Diego State was next for me. And again, I like that the committee recognized them as a 14th overall team, 4 seed 3 weeks ago, but a lot has changed. They've taken losses in each week. And last week they went an unfortunate 0-2, which included a home loss and a loss at non-tournament bound UNLV, as far as we know. And so now you look at San Diego State, they're 3-9 in quad 1 and perfect against everybody else. But that is bounds for a little bit of punishment, in my opinion. Again, those wins at the top are actually doing great with the road win at Gonzaga and the neutral St. Mary's outside of the 4 they have at home against tournament level. But I have San Diego State behind Nevada on the 6 line as well. And then for Boise, that makes me want to explain Boise a little bit further. Usually a road win at San Diego State would get you a ton of juice, but because of the fall of the Aztecs a little bit here, it's not as strong as you might think on the surface. And that coupled with the fact that Boise State's got a handful of losses in quad 2 still, and some middling measurements at the end of the process when you kind of do some, guess and check work. I still have Boise kind of more on the 8 line. And Utah State, they have not done anything wrong. They're a conference champion, which the committee will discuss. They have the road win at Boise, which I think keeps them above Boise. But Utah State just right in between all those at a 7 seed still. And in fact, their calories are somewhat empty because, as Steve Alford will tell you, they won the conference championship with an unbalanced schedule.
Just quickly on the Mountain West before we had to break, Rocco. How much does it help that teams like Nevada are surging for maybe the Mountain West bubble teams, right? Colorado State, I think, is probably relatively safely in. Would take a really bad loss for them to get bounced at the moment. They have a great win over Creighton. You should be fine. But New Mexico is a team we will talk about next segment in the bubble conversation. New Mexico swept Nevada, won at Lawler, and also beat them by 34 points at the Pit, right? I mean, These are small things, but I know we've talked about the impact for St. John's that Villanova has risen, the impact for certain teams of watching your wins age well. Curious your thoughts on maybe the impact down the seed list for the Mountain West of what Nevada and Boise have done lately.
Sure. For Colorado State and New Mexico both, it helps to have all these teams to go out and try to beat, as you go through the schedule, because that whole wins against the field thing really matters to the committee. However, it's not the end all be all. Everybody plays 31 team schedules. Everybody has very different non-conference schedules, which we'll get into with New Mexico. So the evaluation is not just that one or two pieces. Of course, it helps that the Mountain West has somewhat outperformed the Pac-12, maybe not as a total, but as a amount of teams that are candidates to be selected as at-large teams. That helps them get those wins against the field. But you certainly want to have a mix of results and a consistent amount of results traditionally to be selected. So it's not the end-all, be-all.
All right. Good to know. We head to break. When we come back, bubble time. Last four in, first four out. Don't go anywhere.
There is nothing better in sports than tournament time, which is why I need to tell you guys about our partners over at Rhythm. If you're into sports betting, you need Rhythm, the place for data-backed props and picks. For those that are unfamiliar, Rhythm, spelled RITHMM, is the go-to mobile app for player props and game picks. Backed by AI predictive models, Rhythm helps you make smarter and faster betting decisions across all sports, but particularly college basketball. With Rhythm, you get data-backed picks for every single Division I game every single day. Users get free picks daily with the ability to upgrade to unlimited access. If you want to increase your edge and win more bets, go to the link in the description and download Rhythm today. That's RITHMM, the place for data-backed props and picks. And while we're here, let me tell you about our newest partner for the month of March, Splash Sports, the home of certified community competition, where you get to play against your friends and not the house. Whatever game it is that you are playing, from survivors to tiers to pick X, the safest way to play for real money without the hassle of having to track down deposits or worry about payments is through Splash. They have partnered with PaySafe, the best deposit and payment system in the world, to ensure that money stays in safe hands and is delivered to the right places. To join the Field of 68 Survivor Madness, click the link in our profile below and join in. Entries are $5 a pop with a prize pool of up to $4,500. Winner take all. Join Splash and come prove that you're smarter than us.
Bubble talk, lots to get to. Less than a week till Selection Sunday. Appreciate you all joining us here on Fielding 68, brought to you by Rhythm. Kevin Sweeney, Rocco Miller, Andy Bottoms, the whole crew out here, ready to break down the bubble. As a reminder, our last segment of the day is questions from the chat. So if you are in the YouTube chat right now, drop your questions. Obviously, once you see our bubble, you may have more, you may have less. Hopefully, we answer some of those questions here in this segment. But drop your questions. We will get to those in the final 15 minutes of the show. But first, let's get to the bubble. Rocco, we'll start with you on the last four in front. Take us through where things stood as you made your selections today for those final four teams of the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's a longer story, but I'll try to abbreviate that. Michigan State is the fourth, I guess we'll call them the fourth safest today. And there's a mix of other factors going on, at least from my perspective. Last night, James Madison got their 29th win, and no team in history, RPI or net era, has won 29 games against D1 teams. Of course, James Madison beat Michigan State, so it's a good time to bring them up. They play for the Sun Belt Championship tonight. Super crucial, because depending on how you feel about them, they might be involved in this mix if they lose. But we'll push that aside. For Michigan State, we knew they took a loss at Indiana late yesterday. They find themselves here today, 14-13 when you remove quad 4. Of course, they're performing still as a top 25 net team. Doesn't make a big difference for selection. They're 4-9 in road neutral games. Their resume score comes in at a 44. They don't really have a bad loss, but they did take home losses to Iowa and Ohio State recently, two teams that are trying to fight to make themselves interesting for NCAA selection, but I would say are still NIT bound as we speak. And the other ugly thing about the Spartans is they're just 8-13 in the top two quadrants. So that's a pretty far out of bounds record in their 21 most important games. So there are reasons to leave the Spartans out, and they will open the Big Ten tournament with Minnesota. So a loss there, and things could get really, really hairy for Michigan State in a hurry, on top of how hairy they already are. Indiana State's next. For me, the Sycamores are a team where they're very difficult to compare to other Power 6 teams. I've been talked about to death here in the last day on Twitter. But I think right now they're the safer selection than some of the other extremes. And again, that's a varying opinion. So the unbelievable part is we have a 12-person committee. I think maybe the room could be split on them if they belong or they don't belong. I think for all these teams we're about to review, you're looking at a pool of teams that will either shrink or expand. We've been forecasting 2 bid steals, like I said earlier, the entire process from the A10 and the American. What if Dayton and FAU both win those tournaments? Maybe we have 2 more spots. That will change things. Or if those 2 don't go to them like we expect and more bid steals happen in like the Pac-12 or maybe that Sun Belt example, then all of a sudden, these teams are even at more extreme risk. So Indiana State, 15-5 away from home, a top 29 performance team, a top 40 resume team. Not much else to compare with, except for they have 3 wins inside the top 2 quads on the road at Bradley, Northern Iowa, and Belmont. Not tournament teams, but still really tough road wins. Next, I have Mississippi State. Talked about them earlier. A team that really surprised me when I ran all their numbers this morning. Go back and rewind the tape if you want to hear more on the Bulldogs. And then last, Texas A&M just squeezed in. Again, it feels weird putting 2 SEC fringe teams like this in together. It's just the way it broke out when all the comparisons were finalized. Texas A&M finds themselves, and of course, a very polarizing profile here. But they have the neutral Iowa State win, the home Tennessee, Kentucky, Florida, and Mississippi State wins to get them to 5-7 against tournament level competition. They're actually 11-9 against the top 2 quadrants, which is far better than like a Michigan State. But of course, they have 6 losses to non-NCAA teams. So it's very difficult on Texas A&M. That's another team I think the room would be split. But for today, because they are 500 without quad 4, I felt just good enough. Also for the Aggies, a 21st ranked non-conference strength of schedule. I think that will help them in a lot of tiebreakers.
Yeah, the Aggies, again, we've talked about how unique their resume is, but blowing out blowing out Ole Miss over the weekend certainly helped. They might get another crack. I believe they are getting another crack at Ole Miss this week. See if they can double down and blow them out. Andy, your side, obviously, plenty to say on these teams, but if you've got overlap with Rocco and anything new to share, let us know. Take us to your last 4.
Yeah, we do have a couple teams overlapping, so I'll try to focus on the 2 that aren't. Although I will say Michigan State and Mississippi State, I think, were the next 2 teams that were just clear of this group for me. So a lot of similar thoughts with them. But I had Virginia and St. John's, and then Indiana State and A&M were the 2 overlap ones. Virginia, we touched on them on Friday back when you were in the bracketologist role, Sweeney. But the resume metrics are solid. They've got the win at Clemson is really good. They beat Florida on a neutral court. They just don't have a ton of high-end wins, but the resume metrics feel good enough that they'll be in the field. For them, the next likely meaningful game is going to be Clemson in the ACC tournament. So it'll be interesting to see. I think if they lose that game, things could get pretty interesting for them as you head down the stretch. St. John's, they really for the past week and a half have only had games that could hurt them and not really help them against DePaul and Georgetown. So they've pretty much stayed where they were. Certainly avoided landmines in that situation, but just weren't wins that could move the needle. Quality metrics are really good. Resume metrics average out to almost 60. So there's some question there in that regard. 3-9 against Q1, but 6-2 in Q2. Have 1 quad 3 loss. Kind of 7-8 road neutral, 5-6 true road games. So just kind of around the middle. The challenge with them is they really had benefited from Villanova being in the field. With their sweep of the Wildcats looking a little bit better at that point. Villanova is now out of the field after losing, at least out of my field. So really hurts them in terms of really, really top-end wins. It's just the Creighton win at home and have beaten up on a lot of the Big East bubble teams, which is good, but sets up a really important match against Seton Hall in the quarterfinals of the Big East. Indiana State, nothing really to add as we look at them. A&M, the only thing that I would add to that is, from a road perspective, they've got 6 true road wins. And 5 of those fall in the top 2 quadrants. So, again, while none of those are marquee road wins and none of those are against teams that are NCAA tournament teams at this point, at least from a top 2 quadrants road win perspective, that helps them a little bit more. And then the rubber match with the Rebels gives them a shot at UK, which would certainly have a chance to move the needle and give them at least a little bit of breathing room if you're there. But kind of like Rocco, to me, it was the 11-9 against the top two quadrants. Felt hard to leave out despite those kind of awkwardness of the 4 quad 3 losses.
So Andy, you probably can speak to this better than I can. My main question with A&M and Villanova, and we'll get to them, I believe, in our first 4 out. I know this is going to make our segment run long, so I apologize to our producer ahead of time. It's one thing to be the 14-15 loss team, right? We've seen there's history to suggest that you can have that many losses and make the NCAA tournament because you've accomplished a ton, you have a lot of wins. Is there history for you to have that many losses and 3 or even 4 of them are bad losses? That's the thing that I just can't quite wrap my head around, right? If you're A&M, you have 4 quad 3 losses, and you have a lot of total losses, right? It's not like they have 7 losses. They have 13 losses, and they will have 14, presumably. I'm just very curious how the committee views that, and I'm curious if you have any history that might swing things one way or another, in my opinion.
I don't have it handy with me. The Rutgers team from a couple years ago is the one that kind of comes to mind immediately as having some bad losses, but having enough quality wins at the top end to offset that. I'm sure Rocco may have others that he would throw out there as well, but it's not unprecedented, I wouldn't say. I think you do have to really have some of those top end wins. I think the fact that they scheduled well helps their case, and really both their cases, quite honestly. I think that helps. It's one thing to take losses, but it's another to take them when you went out and really trying to challenge yourself in the non-conference. So they have the potential to be the opposite of getting penalized for not doing that. Both could make the argument, hey, look, we picked up some of these losses because we really went out and tried to schedule well. Whether that falls on deaf ears in the committee room is another question, but I do think both of them have an argument in that regard to be able to help bolster their case.
Let's get to the consensus quick. I'm sure we could spend an hour on that segment on that topic alone. But we got to get through this here. Mississippi State, top of our last 4 in. Again, trying to avoid a 5-game losing streak into Selection Sunday when they play LSU. St. John's, Texas A&M in the field, and then our last team in is Colorado, whose performance metrics very strong, but the lack of top end wins could make things interesting on Selection Sunday for the Buffs. First 4 out, right back to you, Andy. Who missed the cut for you? I'm imagining maybe a team or 2 from that bubble might be off your seed list.
Yeah, Colorado was there for me. The first 3 out, Colorado, Villanova, New Mexico were somewhat easy, and then the 4th one I ended up leaning toward Iowa. I think you can make an argument for Pitt in that spot as well. Perhaps some other teams. Colorado. Again, we talked about them last week. The challenge for them is not metrics related. It's not they have a bunch of quad 3 and quad 4 losses. It's simply that they haven't beaten as many good teams as some of the others that they're competing with. They have a home win against Washington State. That's their only win over a team in the field. They have a home win over Utah. That is looking a little bit worse, with Utah falling a little bit further back. But they did sweep Oregon and Washington, beat Richmond, who is projected as the auto bid from the A-10 at this point. But it's hard for me to look at them and say the metrics should matter when they have 1 win over against a team in the field. Now, we may find that having 27th ranked net and some of the metrics that they do is good enough. And we'll see how that moves a little bit over the course of the week. They're likely to play Utah again in their first Pac-12 tournament game. So that one can matter a bit there. They've helped a little bit with their road record by sweeping the trip to the Oregon schools last week. So they were just 2-7 in true road games heading into that. So they did help their case in that regard, but they were still the last one out for me. Villanova, we touched on a little bit, losing that game over the weekend to Creighton. That would have been a big boost for them to be able to keep them in the field. But as it stands now, the record of with the 13 losses being only a few games over 500 hurts them as you look at that. New Mexico, we touched on a little bit and alluded to in the Mountain West section. Again, all 3 of these teams that are my first 3 out were the top 33 of the net. But New Mexico, their wins against the field have all come in Mountain West play. Strength of schedule is almost 270th. And so you look at the damage that they've really done. They won at Nevada. Other than that, their best wins are all at home. and they have that home loss to Air Force. So they get a chance to avenge that, and then a shot at Boise in the Mountain West tournament. And then, like I said, Iowa was here at the end, really dug themselves a huge hole in that game against Illinois. Tried to almost came all the way back to get out of it, but was just too much to overcome. And it's kind of a statement on their season so far. They kind of dug themselves a hole a little bit and have played well down the stretch, picked up a couple nice road wins at Michigan State and at Northwestern. The Seton Hall win in the non-conference helps a little bit there as well. But they're going to need to do some work in the Big Ten tournament. They face Ohio State first, then get another shot at Illinois at that point. So we'll see if they can right the ship and get past those. But I felt like there was a bit of a gap for me between the first three out and whoever you want to pick as the fourth.
Okay, that's great insight. We appreciate it. Rocco, quickly your first four out. I wanted to flag with Colorado, a team that maybe you can speak to this a little bit. Colorado doesn't have any of those truly bad losses, but they do have 3 losses to teams outside the top 100 in the net. Those are hidden in quad 2 right now, but I'm curious from your perspective, did those bad losses weigh in the Colorado conversation if they weren't in your field?
Oh, they always weigh, yeah. And I mean, you could go from the Florida State loss down through the California loss, but I just think Colorado's a really interesting case that would get deeper discussion. They've been a team that's been injury plagued all year long with stars missing, and they finally are starting to hum now. They've won 4 straight, including a sweep on the road at Oregon. I just think based on everything across the board, all the listed numbers, they scream tournament team regardless of the fact they only have the 1 win over the field, which is a home Wazoo win. But all their records are much better. They're 6-5 in their hardest 11. They're 500 in their hardest 18, and then which are all in the top 2 quads, and then perfect after that. It's tough because you're comparing them to a lot of other iffy profiles, but I do have Colorado just above the cut line, above Michigan State. Kevin.
Good to know. Okay, quickly through your first 4 out then. Who was out for you?
Yeah, out for me, I have St. John's first team out. I'm just not all the way there on the Johnnies. I know if we're in a committee standpoint, I could be outvoted. It seems like a lot of people like to have them in the first 4 going to Dayton. I'm just not as impressed. The Villanova sweep, whether you want to count that as a tournament level win or a pair of wins or not, it takes them from 3-8 against the field or 1-8 against the field. It's difficult. 3-9 in quad 1, 9-11 through the top 2 quads, and just 12-12 500 in meaningful games. But their biggest road wins, again, Villanova and Butler, good road wins, but they had 8 opportunities for good road wins, and they went 2-6. They went 7-8 away from home. Outside of the home Creighton win, they just don't have that mean punch. And a team like Texas A&M has a bunch of them. Although they have worse losses too. So it is very difficult to make these decisions. It's not done in a vacuum. But I have St. John's right there. And I think a win over Seton Hall might just improve things enough to put them in. Again, it always depends on what everyone else does to it. It's not just about St. John's. New Mexico, same boat as before. Missed opportunity at Utah State. Really another tough loss for them. Of course, I love them as a team. Really believe they could go, a round or 2 or 3 if they get in. But the facts are the facts. They're just 1-6 on the road against top 2 quads. The only big one they got was Nevada, which, as I said earlier, is the hardest one now in the Mountain West, according to my seed list. But they had the unfortunate situation where they had to play a lot of home games in non-conference, that 268 non-conference strength of schedule, coupled with the Air Force loss, and you could argue the UNLV loss, both in the pit, is really dragging them down to the point where their strength of resumes is 71. And then for Iowa, Andy touched on them as well. I just thought they were the last team in for me Friday. That loss to Illinois pushes things on the other side, 12-13. I think they need at least 2 wins coming up. They, of course, open with Ohio State, and then they have to play that Illinois team again. And again, it also depends on how much is the committee going to allow room for those games to take into consideration. So Iowa's in trouble right now, and then Villanova, as Andy touched on, great wins. If there's a unicorn in this group, it's them because of the win at Creighton, neutral North Carolina, Texas Tech, Seton Hall at home. But their records are way off the grid right now with 12-14 in meaningful games. would be pretty unprecedented, even though it's only a 5-year history to put them in.
All right, let's quickly go through our consensus. First 4 out. Indiana State, our first team out of the field. The Sycamores will be sweating, certainly, all week long. New Mexico, second team out. They at least get the opportunity to play themselves in at the Mountain West Tournament. Villanova, who Rocco just mentioned, and then the Iowa Hawkeyes. Appreciate y'all sticking with us. Again, first 4 out, last 4 in. Very interesting stuff. It's the time of year where we really want to zoom in. And as always, if you want to see the full bracket, it is at the Field of 68 social channels coming up shortly after the show is finished. When we come back, we'll answer your questions. Head to the YouTube chat right now. Send us in what you've got, and we'll do our best to answer anything you guys have for us. These guys are the experts. They're pretty good with almost anything that they get thrown at them. So we will be back on Fielding 68.
By now, you guys have surely heard about Autograph, an app founded by Tom Brady with the intention of disrupting the way that fans consume content covering their favorite teams. This is how the app works. All of the podcasters, bloggers, and digital creators covering a team have their content sent to that team's page in the Autograph app. Instead of having to bounce from site to site or trying to navigate the safer workspaces on Twitter, you can just scroll through Autograph. This isn't a hard sell. This is the truth. I am a UConn fan, and I use the Autograph app to keep up with the writers I read and the pods that I listen to about UConn basketball. The best part is that every piece of content that you consume gives you reward points. The more you get, the more chances you have at things like discounted tickets to games and the grand prize, a trip to the LA Regional and a spot in the suite for the Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games. Here's the best part. We've partnered with Autograph to donate $1 to the V Foundation every time someone downloads the app using the code F68, with a minimum of $2,500 getting donated. The app is free. So download, use the code F68, help us raise a little bit of money for cancer research, and give Autograph a try. I promise you it will be worth it. And while we're here, a quick reminder, make sure that you subscribe to the Daily. We have new landing pages with deep dives into each coaching change, as well as a tracker that provides scouting reports on the transfers that have entered the portal that you are going to want to know about. Hit the link below to subscribe.
Bringing it home with chat questions on Fielding the 68. I am Kevin Sweeney, joined by the experts Rocco Miller, Andy Bottoms. It's been a big show, and we have shows for you all week. Remember, Wednesday, a new show, 5:30 Eastern. We'll give you a midweek check-in. Friday, we'll have a show, and then on Selection Sunday as well. So you won't want to miss everything from Fielding the 68 this week. We got chat questions. A few of them already starting to pour in. I'll start with those, and as you guys drop them down, we will add them to our sheet. Start with Andy on BYU. Jeff F. wants to know what the projection is that you have for the Cougars, where they stand.
Yeah, they're right on they're my first 5 seed. So we talked about that cluster of SEC teams that were on the 4 line. They're just clear of that for me. I think they're, have a reasonable chance at a 4. I think if you look at Auburn, we talked about some of the things that maybe could go wrong for them with only the one quad 1 win. I think BYU is the one that, at least at this point, stands to benefit from that the most. That Kansas, winning at Kansas holds a lot of weight as you look there. 6-7 in the top quadrant with some nice wins, and so I think you feel good about them. I'd struggle to see them fall beneath a 5, but I think they could get to a 4. So I think they're pretty much firmly entrenched in that area. The predictive metrics have been really good all season long, and so that has definitely helped their case. But the resume metrics are solid as well. They average out to 24th, so really solid in that regard as well. So not a lot to dislike from their standpoint, and I think a lot better chance to move up the seed list than move down based on where they sit currently.
Cougars will be dancing now, just a matter of where, and quite the year it has been for Mark Pope and company. Rocco, Andrew S. wants to know where you have St. Mary's in your bracket.
Yeah, St. Mary's is hanging on in the 6 seed area. Of course, haven't played in 9 days. It felt, it's more about teams around them, but The one team was Utah State. Comparing them for the last 6, I still think St. Mary's, with their wins in the Kennel and at Colorado State, just from a seeding standpoint, moved the needle a little bit more than Utah State's one big road win, which was Boise. Again, that's simplifying the answer, but St. Mary's, of course, the only team in the country perfect on the road. The committee loves that, albeit St. Mary's has 2 ugly home losses to Missouri State and Weber State. But I think just seeding-wise, I think St. Mary's has done enough. If they just show up here in Vegas, win tonight against Santa Clara, and even if they bow out to Gonzaga like they usually do in the championship, I think they'll probably land right around here.
Andy, we've got a question from Terry F. about teams that are just safer than the last 4 in. So we didn't necessarily talk about them in the bubble segment, who we should still be watching this week from a danger standpoint.
Yeah, I think we touched on a handful of them, at least for me. Like I said, Mississippi State, Michigan State, we're just outside of that. I think both have games that if they lose, they're not so far clear of the last 4 in that they would be super safe in that regard. I think you look at TCU, which I think Rocco brought up earlier as well. I think they're hovering in that area. And then the other, Oklahoma, he touched on. Florida Atlantic, maybe a little bit in that mix as you look there. But I think and then Seton Hall, I guess I would say, although I think even if they lost to St. John's, they might end up in Dayton, but don't think they drop out entirely. So I think like the next 4 that I have outside of that, outside of my last 4 in are TCU, Michigan State, Seton Hall, Mississippi State. So that's kind of how I would at least peg that, although I think you can make an argument that maybe an Oklahoma or Florida Atlantic could maybe be in that mix as well. But I think it would take a lot of chaos for them to fall all the way out from where they are now to not being in the field at all.
Rocco, we've got a question from Abel F., and he's curious about the top seeds. We talked about Purdue, UConn, and Houston being pretty strongly at the top, but what would change if one of those teams or more lost in their conference tournament? Is there anything substantial that those teams are playing for?
To me, I think Purdue is far and away the top team. I think they've got that locked up personally, just doing the analysis today. I get that they would have 4 losses and the other 2 would have 3, but they've just done so much damage in terms of what the amount of wins they've put in their basket coming into Selection Sunday. As for Houston and UConn, you could still argue those 2 for 2 and 3. I think UConn, their benefit is, if they – with their road wins, I think it's a little – they won at Marquette. That pushed them back over Houston, but they've been seesawing for a couple weeks. If one of them lost early, especially to a non-tournament team, make that decision pretty easy. But otherwise, there's not a lot on the line for those 3 in terms of where they're going to land in the bracket, because I do think Purdue's your solid number 1. And, you could see UConn or Houston fall in the 2-3 order, but they'll be on that right side of the bracket.
And our last question of the day, I'll send it to Andy. From a bracketing standpoint, how do you guys decide what region the 13 through 16 seeds play in?
Well, in that case, you're a bit more at the mercy of who's already been slotted as the top 3 seeds in those regions. So it really just becomes a matter of who's where, because you can't have teams from the same conference be within those seed lists. And then if you're talking about the actual pod that they go into is the actual site, you're usually kind of left with the scraps at that point where you haven't found other teams to go to. So we talked about a lot of those SEC teams being there. It becomes a little bit easier in this case because you can't be with Tennessee. And so they would essentially be in the other 3 regions, and you just go in order and put them at whichever regional is closest geographically for them that way. In general, though, once you get to that point, it kind of takes care of itself a little bit, unless you've really got a situation where you have to shuffle other teams around. But usually by then you've got major conference teams, and you've got major conference teams that you've already tried to split up on the first 3 seed line. So the puzzle pieces kind of fall into place at that point in most cases.
Yeah, and I'll just add real quick on that. With BYU in play, There has been a couple exercises I've done this year where I had to move locations around to accommodate BYU because they cannot play on Sundays. So there was one instance where Creighton was actually a 3 seed, but I had to send them to Spokane, even though they would have preferred Salt Lake City, due to the fact that Spokane was a Friday-Sunday site to avoid the BYU situation. So sometimes with BYU in the mix, you have to go back and change things around to make it work. But beyond that, Andy explained it beautifully.
Good stuff, guys. We appreciate it. That's why you guys are the best in the business, and we will hear from you guys all week on Fielding the 68. Games to watch, I guess. On my sheet, I have the conference championship games tonight with James Madison in particular, and then potential bid stealer in the WCC. Anything tomorrow to look forward to for either of you guys? Start with Andy.
Really, you've got conference championship games. You got 5 of them. I think the WCC is the one where if somebody springs an upset tonight, you'd want to be watching it from a bid thief standpoint. But if it ends up being St. Mary's and Gonzaga, not a lot of intrigue in terms of who's in at that point. I think the James Madison one tonight is probably the one that has the biggest chance for some impact, and it would really kind of then you'd have to fall back on what your assessment of the Dukes really is at that point and whether they should be in regardless. Bubble teams everywhere will be rooting vehemently for them to win and take that piece out of the equation.
Rocco, anything else on the radar either today or tomorrow?
Yeah, those are the main two for bracketology and at large standpoint. But I'll say, if East Tennessee State takes out Samford, that's a team that had close to a 500 record. That could shake things up. Maybe a 14 pops up to a 13 and they go down to a 15, 16. A couple different scenarios like that. We'll see what happens in the CAA. They have their semis tonight, a few other tournaments, as Andy alluded to. But beyond that, it's all going to be great basketball. And I love these 2 days because it allows us to kind of dissect this data before a lot of these at-large candidates take the court again.
Should be fun. It's a great time of year. Tickets to be punched to the big dance starting here in just a couple minutes, and we will be watching certainly all week on Fielding 68. Again, bracket over on our social channels here coming up shortly. But for Rocco Miller and Andy Bottoms, I am Kevin Sweeney signing off on Fielding 68. Happy Selection Sunday week, folks. Should be fun.